Hello, everyone. I'm Bo from Brutal Commentary, and today I'm gonna be breaking down our next matchup for UFC Houston. In this matchup, we have Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani taking on Phil Rowe. Now, real quick, this is going to be a short notice match for Phil Rowe. It was originally supposed to be Austin Vanderford versus Jean-Paul, or throughout the remainder of the video, I'll say JPL, as that's not only his nickname, but it'll be a little bit easier. But as I said, it was originally supposed to be Austin Vanderford. He pulled out, and Phil Rowe has now stepped in on short notice, which definitely makes the fight very different for JPL, as he was originally going to be fighting a more or less grappler slash wrestler centered fighter. Now he takes on Phil Rowe, who's a much lankier, rangier striker, pretty good boxer. One of the best things about Phil Rowe is his killer instincts, considering the fact he has actually never won a fight via decision. It's only ever been by knockout. Or I guess technically just finishes. So that definitely brings an interesting factor to this one. Now, looking at their styles, for JPL, he's pretty composed, pressure-capable fighter who understands how to close distance without panicking. He doesn't sprint into exchanges, and he doesn't rely on wild moments to win rounds. Instead, JPL, he advances behind intent, staying balanced and forcing opponents to react to him rather than the other way around. What stands out the most with JPL is his willingness to take ground methodically. He doesn't need to dominate every second. He's comfortable making the fight smaller over time, cutting off exits, forcing resets, and steadily narrowing the space his opponent has to work. And that kind of pressure doesn't always look dynamic, but it's effective. Another important piece of his game is discipline. He doesn't overextend chasing shots. He doesn't abandon defense just to land offense. And when JPL commits, he commits with structure, which allows him to stay present in the exchanges and keep building momentum. Plus, he's shown to be a pretty well-rounded finisher. You look at it, only 2 of his wins are by decision. The rest are by finish. For example, he has 5 submission wins. And in this type of fight, I definitely think that's going to be important. Now, looking at Phil Rowe, he's a tall, rangy striker who best works at distance. I mean, you saw him when he fought Neil Magny. They both pretty much look the same. If you're talking about both height and reach, relatively speaking, they are the exact same fighter. Now, for Phil Rowe, he's very comfortable fighting long, using his range to touch opponents from the outside and forcing them to navigate a lot of space before they can get any meaningful offense going. And especially when Rowe is in rhythm, he can be very difficult to approach cleanly because his jab and straight are key weapons. Very good at using them to find range and then sting his opponents. And given his natural height advantage, especially in open space, that becomes a big problem. And if Phil Rowe, if he's allowed to set his feet, see the fight clearly, and operate without pressure, he can pick moments and score efficiently. That being said, he's always had one big issue. That is the ground game. Whether it's taking on a good wrestler or just someone with really good control and good mat returns, Phil Rowe has always had kind of historically struggled, like seen against Jake Matthews, and especially in his last fight against Sok Yong Kyo, who just has very good positional awareness. And usually that definitely just comes back to bite Phil Rowe in the ass. Now, I give credit to Rowe. He has continuously improved his get-up abilities. It's shown. But it just, against the best grappler, especially at welterweight, it just isn't enough. That being said, his submission defense is pretty good. In fact, Phil Rowe has actually never been finished, so that is definitely a credit to him. Now, I think where this fight becomes interesting is more or less the styles, right? Because Phil Rowe is someone who wants comfort, right? When he's in space, when he has ability to move, cut angles, whatnot, he's in comfort. Meanwhile, JPL, his style is built around denying any comfort. Now, I think early in the fight, Rowe will likely look very sharp, use his reach, stay mobile, and try to meet make JPL work or just to get into range. That's expected, right? That's Phil Rowe's style. But JPL isn't going to rush those moments because he doesn't need to. His goal early, I think, is to read patterns, test reactions, and start closing space in small increments. Each exchange doesn't need to be decisive. He just needs to move the fight closer to where he wants it to. Plus, given that JPL can wrestle, I think that's another factor in this fight that I might think work against Phil Rowe. Like I said, he's gotten better. He's gotten better in takedown defense and overall just the his get up game. I don't know how well that's going to work because, like I said, Jean-Paul has shown good grappling in the past. Now against lower ranked opposition to Phil Rowe, but still, nevertheless, JPL might have a path to victory here, or at least the path of least resistance. That is through his wrestling, but he can strike too. He's shown in his debut in the Contender Series where he was able to land that right high kick and then later on the right hook very effectively. So whether it's on the feet or on the ground, it definitely feels like JPL has more paths to victory than Phil Rowe. Just something I want to say. Now, that said, I think Phil Rowe will have a lot of moments, especially early on at range, because when you're a taller fighter, the beginning of the rounds are often their best I would say best moments in the fight because they can take the center early and then start working their game from range. While his opponent, who would have a height and reach disadvantage, is going to be the one having to take that space away at the beginning of each round. But with that said, and for my official prediction, I got to go with Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani. I think his well-roundedness is just going to be too much of a problem for Phil Rowe, right? He's shown in his striking he has the power to hurt his opposition and very good at mixing in his attacks. Then you look at some of the other regional scene, good wrestling and grappling, and I think enough to stifle Phil Rowe's offense and also keep Phil Rowe guessing. So I think if JPL just mixes up the martial arts, I think he's going to have a clear path of victory. Now, could he get a finish? I'm not sure, because like I said, Phil Rowe is pretty tough. He's never been finished before. And, JPL doesn't need to chase finishes. All he needs to do is just keep the pressure honest, right? Stay balanced and continue forcing Rowe to work. I think over time, that's going to sap Phil Rowe's gas tank, and JPL will probably look like the fresher fighter. That being said, though, Phil Rowe is very good at comeback victories, like against Angeloso, where both retired, but Phil Rowe just had a bit more in the tank. Excuse me. But so I think I gotta go with JPL, and I think I'm gonna pick him via decision win. Like I said, I just think his well-roundedness is gonna be too much of a factor. And like I said, the fact that he can wrestle efficiently definitely will hamper Phil Rowe greatly in this fight. So once again, I'm gonna pick JPL, and I'm gonna pick him via decision. But with that being said, that's been my breakdown of this matchup. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below on who you think's gonna win. But until then, I've been Bo from Brutal Commentary. I thank you all for listening. And remember, stay calm, stay respectful, and enjoy the violence. I'll see y'all next time.